As you could see in intro, I'm Jan de Vries. I'm a cloud solution architect working at a small consulting firm called 4.net based in the Netherlands, which means I do a lot of consulting at a lot of customers and doing also, well, projects, doing hands-on development because that's the stuff I like. Also an MVP, which means I get around the world when there's not a pandemic going on. And you can follow me on Twitter if you want to direct me, if you want to connect to me immediately. So managed identities, cool stuff, cool stuff. Active Directory, most of the time boring, but it's very interesting. So first, I have to confess something because I mentioned I'm a cloud solution architect. But what should you be doing when designing your solutions for customers? As I said, I have to confess something. Most of the time, or a lot of the times, I check out which services were published and are new and shiny this week in Azure and see how I can fit those in my solution. I know it's a bad thing, but Azure has so many awesome services you probably want to use. So it's not hard to fit them in, but it's not the way you should be doing it. So if you have any comment on this, how you're doing the design of your solution, please let me know in the chat. I have it open on the screen over here. So let me know. I'm very interested in what do you think or what are you doing to design your solutions? Because I know what I should be doing is take into consideration, well, all of this stuff and even more. So as a consultant, I get, well, assigned to a company and a project, and we have to build something or we have to create a solution for something, which means there's probably some time to market. Some companies or some projects need to be finished in 1 month, others in 10 years. You need to think about performance of your solution. And also something which is kind of important, the knowledge of the team in-house. So what our consulting firm does is we're considered the experts and we're going to help the customers get an awesome solution, but also delivering some of our knowledge to the in-house development team so they can maintain it, move on with the solution we're creating, stuff like this. So this is also something to take into consideration. So if I design some solution with hundreds of services, completely distributed with all of the awesome design patterns there are out there, and if I'm working with a rather junior team at the customer, I've probably done a bad job. We could probably scale massively, but not taking into consideration the knowledge of the team and how fast they can ramp up is a bad practice. So these are all things you have to take into consideration. Today's topic, managed identities, which is something security related. And seeing all of the hacks nowadays and all of the breaches nowadays on Twitter, on well, wherever you get your newsfeed from, we need to focus a bit more on security. Managed identities help. Managed identities are only one thing you should add to your solution, but it's, well, something to do. So, as I mentioned, I get around a lot at different customers, and most customers have just stepped into Azure or are figuring out how to do it, and some of them are already online for, well, a couple of years now in Azure, or maybe some other cloud platform, but most of the time Azure. And then they show me this solution or something like this. So I'm going to grab the pointer, the laser pointer. As you can see, we have an application service, which, well, probably is the front-end API or maybe a web application. And this is the location, this is the service everyone is talking to. So this service is talking to another backend service, which, well, also does stuff. We have some SQL databases in the picture, and I was once told a couple of years back, every great solution, every great cloud architecture needs at least one queuing mechanism. So I've drawn in a service bus over here, just to be just to make the design proper, and a couple of other services which do, well, their own little things, because maybe some of the team members has read something on microservices and thought this is the way to do it. Well, this is something I see quite often, something like this. And it's not bad per se, but it's kind of suboptimal. The first thing when I see something like this is, well, it's a public cloud, right? So all of these services are exposed to the public internet, so everyone can connect to them. So they probably, or sometimes they think, well, only this application service is accessible from the internet because we've told no one the URLs of these backend services. Sadly, that's not true. So everything is exposed, even the SQL databases, the service bus namespaces, the storage account, everything is exposed if you don't do something about it. Sure, the Microsoft folk do a lot of stuff to make it secure and to make sure you're falling in the pit of success. But you still have to think about some stuff. So, it's public cloud. Sometimes, if I'm lucky, they say, yeah, we've thought about it. We've done IP whitelisting on our backend services. So only some services can connect to it. Only our Azure services can connect to it. Okay, it's a start. If I'm less lucky, they say, yeah, we're sending in a secret passcode in the headers of our HTTP requests. Well, a secret passcode in the headers isn't very secret because you have employees in the source code. Employees leave, employees come, could be shared. Somebody could sniff the network. Stuff happens. So that's not a very good solution, or at least not on itself. Sometimes they create some self-signed certificates. I don't know about you, but I really, really dislike certificates. Sure, they're great. Don't get me wrong, certificates are great and they have their use cases. I just find it a hassle to work with them. You have to have some certificate authority, get a certificate, get stuff signed, having a password, getting the private keys, uploading stuff all over the place. It's a pain. It's very secure and very useful, and it makes sure you recycle the stuff any now and then, but it's a pain to work with, in my opinion. Most of the time, you only notice they got expired after the fact, so that's also annoying. Um, if I'm a bit more lucky, they say, yeah, we've done some awesome stuff over here. We've created some VNets for our backend services and placed them in some subnets, and also, well, the SQL servers and the service buses and whatever else service you can put inside VNets. And that's great. When I hear something like this at the customer, I'm like, yeah, okay. The security part is, well, at least the basics are covered. If you've thought about using VNets and NSGs and securing your environment like so, you're probably in a good condition. So I don't have to check out everything on that part. Sure, there are some other stuff you can do, but it's a good start. And then we have private links, which is somewhat newish, but that's like a hook inside your VNet, so a service can connect to it and access services. So it's a fancy endpoint for some services. Awesome stuff. So if a project is using VNets with NSGs and private links, I'm pretty confident they're on the right path. So as for managed identities, it's not new. Magnus already mentioned it. It's awesome. It's great. It's something you should be using. Most customers, well, I see, or at least most customers I met will be using it sooner rather than later. Because what it is, it's an identity which is managed by Azure. It's in the name. So what it does, if you activate managed identities, system assigned managed identities, I should say, if you activate a system assigned managed identity for a service, this service, the resource manager will create a new identity in Azure, a service principal. You could say it's a service principal. And this service principal gets assigned, gets coupled to your service, let's say an app service. So they're tightly coupled. If you say, I want to turn off this managed identity feature, the identity will also get removed from AAD and like nothing happened. The great part about having system-assigned managed identities is Azure takes care of all the hard stuff, like creating secrets, rolling secrets, making sure everything is secure, and well, stuff like this. There's also the other kind, the user-assigned managed identities, um, which is also great, but it's in the name. It's user assigned, so you have to do something for it. So system assigned, Azure will do everything for you. User assigned, you have to do something yourself. No biggie. So this is a diagram I found in the Azure docs on the inner workings of how to create how a managed identity is being created. So yeah, the resource manager, you tell it you want a managed identity. It'll create a new identity in the AAD. Stuff happens, magic. There's some magical endpoint which gets called. Great stuff. So this is a virtual machine example. And when you get to the part your code is actually running, you can request a token from the local endpoint. So this is a local endpoint hosted on your VM. If you're running on PaaS services, you don't have to worry about it. This is being handled for you. But once you get this token, it's the instance metadata service. So this is the endpoint. Once you get the token on app services, you get this via some magical packages. You can send this token to the service you want to connect to. So this is working great for stuff like Key Vault. You can also use it for SQL Server. You can use it for, I think you can also use it for Cosmos DB nowadays, and well, lots of other services. If you Google or Bing or whatever for a managed identity Azure support, you get a list like dozens and dozens of services which are supporting managed identities. So this is great if you want to call Azure Services. But what I want to do is, because managed identities are awesome, I want to use the token from a managed identity and send this token to my backend services and, well, authorize it over here and see if I can access specific endpoints. So use it like this. So normally you have key vault over here on the right side or SQL or whatever. Now I have my own app service. So is this hard? Well, not really. The hardest part is figuring out what to do, which identifiers you have to fetch, which secrets you have to put where, stuff like this. So that's what I'm going to show you right now. First of all, creating an managed identity is as easy as doing this in your ARM template or turning the status on inside your app service. Turning off a laser pointer. So that's I have an ARM template over here of the service I have deployed to Azure. As you can see, I have a website. This is a website, an app service. It's getting deployed to a server farm, and I'm stating I want a system assigned managed identity. Don't have to do anything for this. And the resource manager will make sure it will get created. So this is my whole solution inside Azure, like this. So we're not going to talk about everything over here because that's too much and kind of defeats this session. What I have over here is this is a service I have deployed, an app service. And as you can see, I have the identity over here. And this is the object identifier, which has been created automatically in the AAD. Cool. So don't need to do anything for this. Oh, I can also show you the enterprise application, the service principal in the AAD. So it got created. Something to note, it has the same name as the app service. But this is how you can, search it inside the AAD. Just search in AAD and enterprise applications for uh, an enterprise app with the same name as your app services. So this is so you can see what identifiers there are and which other properties you can set or view at. So that's all for now. So now that you have this managed identity, you can fetch a token. So what I've done over here is let me zoom in a bit more. Okay, so I have a map. Let me first show you the solution. So where's the mouse? So over here. So this is the solution I have deployed to Azure. So 3 app services, some functions, and some other stuff. So this is the secure API.api. This is my backend for front-end service, which everyone should connect to and get data. So this is people doing the stuff. This API hosts a list of conferences. I can add and delete and update conferences, stuff like this. And this service has a big list of speakers. So, and in my backend for front end, I probably want to select the conference and get all the speakers for it. So aggregate the results and do it all over here. So in order to do this, what I've done is making a couple of HTTP calls with an access token. So what I'm doing over here, I'm using this class, the Azure Service Token Provider, and this Azure Service Token Provider is able to retrieve a token based on some properties and some parameters. So there's also the helper for a key vault token callback. A lot of people are using the managed identities to connect to key vault because it's the most secure way at the moment. So there's a small helper method for this. If you're not connecting to key vault, you have to do stuff like this. No biggie. So as you can see, I'm specifying the application ID URI over here. I'll get back to this later on because this is something we have to create ourselves and configure ourselves. And the tenant ID. So the tenant ID is not necessary. But my account, which I'm logged into, is known as multiple tenants. So my account has access to like 3 or 4 or 5 tenants. I've lost count, with even more subscriptions. And if you don't specify the tenant ID over here, it picks just, the first one. In my case, it was the Microsoft tenant. So when I first tried it, I got a very enormously weird exception, which states I didn't have access to do anything. I get tokens on this tenant. Figured out I was retrieving or I was requesting tokens on a Microsoft tenant, and as it happens, I don't have access to those resources. So specified over here. App service doesn't need it, but for local development, it's useful. So, and when running this, you'll get an access token, a gel token, so which you can put inside the header of the authorization header of your call. So specifying authorization token, this is it. I'm also sending it back to the caller, which is easy for debugging because I'm debugging this stuff. Also doing it live on my deployed solution, so having the access token is rather useful. Not a very good practice though. So as I mentioned, the application ID URI is useful, it's necessary. So let me go back to the browser. What I've done over here is I'm going to focus on the speaker API. And the speaker API has some, well, as I mentioned, the speaker logic. It also has a managed identity, if I'm not mistaken, yes. So we're not going to use this today. But what I've also done for this speaker API is create an application registration inside the AID. So this is my app registration with some details, the client ID, directory, stuff like this. So these numbers are necessary later on for configuration. But what I have over here is the expose an API blade, expose an API, and the application ID URI. And over here you can specify any URI you want. It has to be unique though, because this URI will be used to retrieve tokens. So what I do, or what I've seen other people doing, is having the API and the application ID specified over here. You can do whatever you want, just make sure it's unique. So for the quick viewers, I've also added a dummy scope, a local scope with a client ID which has access to this scope. This is what I figured out while debugging stuff in Visual Studio. Visual Studio can't get tokens for an app registration, or can't work with this unless you add it to the authorized client applications. So I've found a GitHub issue on this where other people also ran into this issue. So if you want to debug your code in Visual Studio, make sure you add the 872 client ID to some scope. Doesn't matter what the scope is, just some scope. There's also a client ID for the Azure CLI. It's a bit different. I have the link in my slide deck, so if you're interested in it, to the GitHub issue, check out my slide deck later on, and you'll have the link. So this is quite important for the configuration in order to get the token for this service. What I also want to do is work with roles. Roles are awesome. I think it's the best practice, or at least it's a good practice to use roles inside your application. You can also use AAD groups, security groups, but it's compared to roles, it's quite limited. For an ops guy or ops person, it's probably easier, but it's more limited. So in order to work with app roles, you have to specify them in the manifest. So the manifest is a big blob of JSON, which specifies what your application looks like, what your application is. And inside, there's an element called app roles. So in app roles, you can specify any role you want. The format is the format is like this. And you have to specify who can get these roles, who can get these roles assigned. Well, obviously a description, display name, doesn't need much explaining. The ID, which is important because the ID is something you need later on when assigning a role to a user or a service principal. It's enabled, and the value is also useful. This is probably something you get from the development team. The development team has created an application and says to the person in charge of the AD, I want the roles to read, to write, to having admin permission, to have contributors, to have whatever role there is. And well, this is the value you should be naming it inside application. So the developers will use this value inside their application. Ops people will use the ID. So what I've done is a reader and a writer role, and I have an application and a user over here. So if you're working with managed identities, you only need application because managed identities are considered service principals which fall in the application types. As I mentioned, I like testing stuff myself also. So I had to assign these roles to myself. And I'm a user, so I had to add the user over here. No biggie. It's probably also useful to have applications and users, but it's something you need to know or at least want to know. So that's the whole manifest. The other stuff isn't very interesting at the moment. And having specified these roles, what I've done now is assign them. So as you can see, I have this managed identity, Janve secure API dash API, which is a service principal, and it has the reader and the writer role. Same goes for me. My account has the reader role because I don't need write permissions for some reason. So that's all cool. How to do this, I'll show you in a couple of minutes. Let's first get back to Visual Studio. So as you saw, I'm gonna open the app settings. Is it stuff over here? Okay, yeah. So what I've done over here is I added an element in my settings called authority. So this is the authority for my application. So I'm in the speaker solution now, speaker project now. And I have this authority, which is used to get a or to validate tokens and make sure your the application lives over there. So the client ID, which is the application ID of the application registration. So the identifier, the GUID you saw in the overview screen of my app registration is something you need. And I'm putting it over here. And the application ID URI is also something I need over here. I'm not sure if I need this over here though. Let's go to the startup because that's where I'm using all of this stuff. So the startup looks rather familiar. You have the configure services, add authorization. So I've added a policy which requires users or whatever services requests to have the scope user impersonation. This is a scope you get, or this is a claim you get for everyone, or at least that's what I've read. So if you just want to check if you get a valid JOT token, check if it's a user impersonation claim inside, and then you're ready to go. In a real production scenario, you probably want to check for other claims also, but this is the most basic demo-worthy check. Then we have the Add Authentication. Well, I want to use JOT bearers scheme and have this, sure, for the valid audiences. So and specify the authority for the JOT bearer scheme. The token validation parameters. So what are the valid audiences? Well, the client ID and the application ID, URI. And if you remember, the client ID, so this is some GUID. So, and in my scenario, this looks like a bit like this. So I have this GUID, and the app ID URI is something like this. So those are both the valid audiences for my solution over here. Yes. Okay. And that's it. That's all you need to do in the speaker in the backend service in order to get authorization going on. And this way, your application is connected to the application registration, or at least configured to the application registration. One thing to note though, which has taken me longer as I'd like to admit, is having to specify these two in the correct order. So all of this stuff I've done on my live coding sessions on my Twitch channel, and had an error, rather strange errors, uh, which were authorization or authentication related, and I couldn't figure out why this happened. So after a couple of hours, I finally switched these around. So at first I had something like this specified, and later I turned them around, and this works. So first first specify use authentication, later use authorization. So it has taken me like 6 hours to figure this out, or at least debug the issues. So hopefully you will never run into this, because this is annoying stuff. Your customer won't be happy when doing this in your boss's time. So that's all there is to it. So specify the schema and that you want to use JWT-bearer tokens, and done. That's all there for the backend. And as you could see, I'm also specifying the application ID URI over here. So in the Azure Service Token Provider, I'm telling the token provider, you get an X token for this app registration, this service on this tenant. And then this object knows, this token provider knows which service it has to get a token for. That's also why the application ID URI has to be unique. Because if you have multiple applications with the same URI, the token provider doesn't have a clue for which application to get a token for. Makes sense, right? So that's there to it. That's for now the demo thingies. So we've covered this, the managed identity, or the managed identity and the enterprise apps, how to get a token. So all of this is in the slide deck. I'll make sure it will get posted somewhere, or you will get it. Get a token, and make a new app registration with, well, some details like I've shown you. This is the GitHub issue I spoke earlier of, so adding the necessary client IDs. The manifest, adding the roles, and specifying, configuring the backend application to have authorization in place. So what do we have now? I'll pour in some water so you can do some reading. We've got a service, the backend to front-end service, with a managed identity. And this service is able to make HTTP calls with the job token in the authorization header. And we have an application registration with app roles, and we've configured authentication on this second service. So that's cool. That's cool. Both are, well, configured correctly now. But as I mentioned, I want to work with roles. And my managed identity doesn't have roles yet. So as you could see in AAD, or what I've shown you a couple of minutes back, my service principal, my managed identity, wants to have the reader and the writer role assigned to it. That's something I need to do. So to do this, let me go to VS Code, where I've got some call specified. So to do this, you can call an AZ REST endpoint, or you can call a REST endpoint using AZ REST, which looks like this. There's also a PowerShell command for this, but I rather use the AZ, even though it's not natively supported. You have to do some REST calls to some endpoints, which I don't consider native. It's a hacky way of doing things, or at least a suboptimal way. So what I need to do over here is call an endpoint, the REST endpoint, where I'm specifying the identifier of an enterprise application. And I've just remembered, I haven't shown you the enterprise application yet. But this is the identifier of the enterprise application. So I'm making a post to this endpoint stating, well, it's a post, so I want to create something new. I want to create a new app role assignment for this enterprise app. I want to assign this role. So this is the reader role or the writer role, doesn't matter. Any role which is specified. I want to assign this role to this principal. And this is the object identifier of the managed identity. Specify it's a service principal because it is. And specifying again the enterprise application. I could also make this a user. If I want to assign a role to myself, I have to specify the principal type is a user. So that's all there is to it. This is also in the slide deck, so you don't have to make photos or copy pasting or whatever. It's in the slide deck. Also, the PowerShell command is a bit easier to read, but I've written this inside such a big script, such a big CLI script, so doing CLI stuff. Running this will grant you the proper roles. So I have the, where is it? Where is it? Ah, I have shown you this. So yeah, this was the enterprise application. So this one got created automatically. And as you can see over here, I have the roles granted to me. So you can find the object identifiers and application ID stuff over here on the overview page again. And well, the users and groups, you can see who has access and which roles. So this enterprise application got created automatically. I didn't have to do anything for this myself, which is great, because the less I have to do myself, the better. And that's the assigning part. There is one thing though. So this is the thing you need to post. There is one thing though. You probably say, yeah, Jan, I don't really feel like adding all of my users, all of my managed identities with this awesome post command to some endpoint. I'd rather assign those identities to a security group and have a security group assigned a specific role. And I couldn't agree more. Thing is, I'm doing this in my own personal tenants, my own personal subscriptions, and I don't really feel like paying the fee for the AD premium, from which you have to like pay $5 or $7 per month per user, which is a lot, and you can't use your MSDN credits for this fee. So I'm in the AD free tenant, so I can't use security groups to assign roles. Most of the time, if you're in a production scenario, you're working with a company who makes money, or at least I hope so, and they probably have an Azure AD Premium P1, maybe P2 if they're a bit bigger, because P2 has such great features you want. It's just an additional fee. But if you're in a production environment with an Azure AD Premium tenant, use security groups. It's much easier for your ops persons to work with. Now for the cherry on top, you probably want to see if this actually works. Well, it does. So I have a tab open over here with my application. So it's this is the application. This is my backend for front end, and you can see this is the output which matches which matches the response object I have in Visual Studio. Let me get back to it. So I have the access token, the body, status code, and the reason. While debugging, the status code and the reason were very useful at the moment. As it works, not much anymore. So the speaker endpoint will call my speakers backend. And as you can see, I refreshed the page and I got stuff. So just to show you, I'm not lying. I'm going to copy the access token over here, and you can see the did it get updated? You can see this stuff. Let me do this in .io. So I get some helper overlays. As you can see, the expiry date issued at second since issued at, which is 1446. Oh, that's a while ago. 1446. Maybe I am lying. Bit hard to refresh. It also caches the token, so maybe I'm still working with the cache token, which I got some time ago. Yeah, looks like it. So this is something I ran into a couple of weeks back when we were figuring out stuff. These tokens get cached for an amount of time. It's mentioned in the docs. I don't remember how long anymore. An amount of time. But as you can see, these are the roles I got back, and this is the audience. So I'm retrieving a token for this audience, which is one of the valid audience. It's the application ID Yuri, and I'm getting the reader and writer roles. If you want to read more on this, I've written some stuff on the matter. So using an Azure Managed Identity to authenticate on a different app service. So this is a bit more text, and a friend of mine who's an expert in this matter has posted some other stuff. I've just rewritten and written it in my own language, so I understand it myself a bit more. But doing all of the stuff I've shown you just now, and also adding the roles, just so you can read it back at your own pace with some context. That's those posts. Don't have to screenshot it. It's on my blog, which is shared over here. So if there's anything you want to screenshot, this is the page, because it has the GitHub repo, which holds the complete repo, source code, ARM templates, stuff like this. It's in the secure API repo, I guess. And if you have any further questions, check out my Twitter, email me, or if you want to see me struggle and finding this out, check me out on Twitch, where I am quite often, or at least a couple of times per month. So that's about it. Managed Identities, know it, learn it, love it. It's awesome, and use it.